Hello and welcome to our webinar, CRM Implementation, How to Get It Right. I'm Christelle Fraisse and I'm the CMO at Workbooks, and I'll be your host for this session, assisted by Eline Bassine, who is on standby to help you if you've got any issue with GoToWebinar. So quick logistics before we start. This webinar is recorded and a link to the recording will be sent to you tomorrow morning. You'll be able to ask questions using the GoToWebinar question panel on your right in the control panel of the tool, and we'll aim to answer as many as we can at the end of the sessions. So we have a fantastic panel for you today. Two end users who have both led a CRM implementation in the last 18 months or so, and two senior professional services consultants who have helped hundreds of organizations implement CRM and accompany change management projects. So let me introduce you to our panelists. First of all, Kylene Brannan, Web Marketing Coordinator at Rotary Corporation. So Kylene, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself and also what is the situation at Rotary when it comes to CRM?
Sure. I have been the admin of Workbooks and was on the implementation team for Workbooks. I was the admin for our previous CRM, which was Salesforce. And I wear many hats within the company. I do a lot of other things, but this is my primary job. So.
Okay, lovely. Jonathan Ramsey, Product and Marketing Manager at DX Exchange. So unfortunately, Jonathan has had some technical issue with his laptop, so he's not going to be able to enable his camera. But Jonathan, can you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the Product and Marketing Manager at DX Exchange. I've been with DX for 20 years across the Australian business and then here in the UK for the past 8 years. We implemented Workbooks last February, and it was our first CRM, formal CRM coming into the business. So it's been an exciting year with the pandemic and everything to introduce a new piece of kit. But definitely very timely.
Good. Okay, I'm sure you'll tell us more about that during the session. Then we have Penny Lowe, who is our SVP of North America at Workbooks. Penny, do you mind sharing your, a little bit about your experience and background?
Okay, I'll try. So I've been doing CRM programs for quite a long time now. I think I did my first help desk implementation in 1988, which is really quite scary. But my role is really to help organisations be successful. And that I've worked with organisations in all sorts of industries, in manufacturing, so I work very closely with Rotary, for example, in media and in financial services, but lots and lots of other organisations as well. And I've worked with organisations that are small and large and everything in between. And as I said, my job is really about helping companies work out their strategies for success, making sure they understand what their outcomes are, and then helping them drive those programs to a successful conclusion.
Great. And then we've got Brendan Crawford, who is a senior consultant and the head of professional services at Workbooks. So Brendan, can I ask you to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hi, I'm Brendan. I've been at Workbooks now since 2017. Starting off as a consultant and then engagement manager, now head of PS. And my job, not dissimilar to Penny's, is just making sure that customers come on board successfully with Workbooks and enjoy that experience and basically achieve their outcomes. And my background before that was, I think, 335 years in software development and solution delivery, or thereabouts. It just feels like that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. So we're going to start, but just before we do, we would like to run a quick little poll. So if you wouldn't mind, all of you who are on the webinar, to just respond to the following poll. So hopefully you should be seeing a poll on your screen. And the question is, when looking at implementing CRM, what are you most worried about? What's kind of keeping you awake at night? And we'd like you to select one of the following answers. So the options are budgets and costs, user adoption and resistance to change, selecting the right partner for the job, data migration, integration, and the last one is state of readiness of your business. So if you wouldn't mind just clicking on the answer, I'm going to give you a few seconds. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now and let's see the results. Okay, so the things that is the most worrying is the user adoption and resistance to change, closely followed by data migration, data integration. And then the other three are kind of about on part, with selecting the right partner coming thirds. Okay, very interesting. So I'm sure most of those topics will be covered during the discussion. So let's get started. Let me hide the results and get you back onto the panel screen. So let's start with our first questions. And I think I'm going to start with Kylene. What was the key success factor for your implementation at Rotary?
Involving the right people that would be able to have the most impact on the success of the project was very much one of the most important things. I was a previous admin for the CRM, and there's another coworker that was also an admin, so we were kind of the heads of the project, and we pulled others in as needed to bounce ideas off of, to get their input off of. We did a lot of meetings with the executives in the company and different departments throughout the company to see if we could fit their needs with the new CRM where they were not involved in the previous one at all.
Okay.
So we did that part, and then another big part of it was that they pretty much gave us the project and said, you make the decisions. They put their trust in us. They let us decide what we were doing, how it was going to go. We did ask for input occasionally, but overall, they let us run the project without interference or nitpickiness about things. And I think a lot of that is because they knew that we were the ones that were in it more than anybody else, and we would know better what we needed to do with it. So we also got several users involved early on as far as asking them questions and getting feedback and ideas from them, and I think that helped getting the end users involved earlier on to get to that helped with the buy-in as well. So that was another important part of it. And then getting them involved in the testing on a smaller scale. Once we got through some of the initial testing, I think that was important also.
So from what I can hear from your experience, Kylene, it's a lot about the people, right? It's about getting the right executive sponsorship, making sure that they trust the team that's going to be implementing, yes, and getting the users on board quickly so you drive that adoption forward.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay. Sounds good. What about you, Jonathan? What do you think was the key success factor for your implementation at DX?
Yeah, so ours is, even though we're a transport company, we're a membership-based organization, and we really had an absence of understanding of who our members were, and an understanding of their kind of service history with us. And while we had centralized and formed a team to manage those inquiries, we lacked a system for all that, you know, great information that we were gathering to reside in. So, you know, if you have a look on the Workbooks website, there's a case study about our implementation. I said we were living in a world of spreadsheets. That was very true. And Workbooks, you know, or moving to the CRM was kind of the key driver for us getting out of spreadsheet land, getting out of data that was historical, and living somewhere that meant that our members knew that we know who they are. It was great to hear, even within a few weeks, of the system going live, the recognition when a member would call in and we would know, what firm they were calling from, what their contact details were. They didn't have to repeat their email address for the 100th time. All those little things really started to make a change for us and for our members. So I think that ability to really bring greater customer satisfaction to members was a key driver for us.
So would you say the success factor was that basically everybody in the organization that was working on the project was focused on getting that outcome?
It was a key,
all about improving the relationship with the customers?
Sure, it was a key source of frustration across, many different areas of the business. So the service team, are taking those inquiries and feeding the information across to the operations team, the sales and account management team. It's very valuable information for them to have that insight into what's happening. And it just wasn't able to be shared in a meaningful, holistic and real-time way, which we basically instantly got as soon as we transferred across to having that information available in workbooks. The sales and service team both went live on the CRM on Valentine's Day last year. Okay. And that was kind of the key driver. We were, from a date point of view, we were very lucky to go live when we did, ahead of then going into lockdown in kind of late March.
Okay. Can I ask you both, actually, Kylene and Jonathan, about how do you go about choosing a partner? How do you know you've got the right partner for your implementation?
I did a lot of research beforehand.
Okay.
I really started months ahead of time, but it was stretched out between all of the meetings that I had with the different companies, talking to them about their products, what it did, trying to really narrow down more what we wanted it to do. And then I was able to narrow down based on things like cost. Do they have extra things, but do those really apply to what we need? Are they going to be exactly like what we had before, which we did not want? That was one of the factors as well. And then when we narrowed it down to meeting with people, for us, I think that one of the success factors is because I felt like we clicked with Penny and the rest of her team, and that made a very good working relationship, which made it so much easier.
Yeah, for you, it's back to people, isn't it?
Yes.
It's kind of really working as a team in getting the success. Okay. And then for you, Jonathan, anything you want to?
Yeah, so I guess it was quite funny. When I moved from the Australian business to the UK, there were we had a role in the marketing team of a CRM manager, and I said, great, what CRM have we got? We didn't have one. We had a manager, but we didn't have a CRM. And part of that drive was trying to get a CRM system embedded into the organization. Unfortunately, it wasn't to be. And I think it's because in many organizations, if you tried to do or take on a project that's perhaps too big, it inevitably falls foul of budget constraints and trying to build, an absolutely enormous bespoke system for the organization. So my remit was smaller than an entire organization. Mine was the business unit of exchange. And by scaling it down to, our business unit, and then speaking as well, probably to the best part of 9 or 10 different vendors in the marketplace over a long period of time, I felt as though we were kind of inching maybe closer to finding something, but we never had that Goldilocks moment. And it always still felt as though this was going to be kind of the unreachable goal. As soon as we started interacting with Workbooks and the team, so Marshall was our person in the kind of pre-sale stage. It just instantly felt like a very different approach. The interface and the demos that we were receiving from the start, all of the team instantly could see that it was much more digestible for a service person, a salesperson, and for us you know, myself as a marketing manager and the marketing exec being able to administer that system without necessarily having to have a degree in managing systems. It just felt like it made sense across all of those different areas.
Okay, well, we'll talk about the implementation approach in a minute. Penny and Brendan, anything you want to add when it comes to, you know, what have you seen as key success factors in the implementations that you worked with customers? What elements have you seen that are absolutely vital to ensure the success of a CRM project? Penny, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I would say, just echoing what Kylie and Jonathan have been saying, really, there's a few things. One is exec sponsorship. So making sure you've got really good exec sponsors, that they're really active and engaged, and they're not just a figurehead, and making sure you've got an empowered and enabled project team. And this is where Rotary did both of those really, really well. It was really amazing to see the level of trust that the senior executive team placed in the project team, in Kylie and Sarah and Macy and so on. It was really inspiring to see that. But the execs were there when they were required, and they really backed the project team on any decisions or any plans that needed to be made. They were really supportive, but they, as Kylie said, they didn't get in the way of getting the job done. The other things that I think are really important are really making sure you understand the why for CRM. So that's both from an organisational perspective and for the individual roles, very much like Kylie and Jonathan have been saying. So how is the CRM going to make their day jobs better, whilst at the same time delivering more revenue, reducing the costs, providing better customer experience and better visibility into business metrics? And then factoring those whys and the outcomes that you want into the roadmap. So don't try and do it all at once. Develop a basics, expand, extend phase. So delivering all the quick wins as quickly as possible in your basics phase, and then before you start moving on to sort of more complex processes and integrations. You know, do those once you've really understood the system and how it's going to make a difference to your business, because you'll find that the processes will change as you get to know the system better and the impact that it's having. So don't spend too much time on those in the first phase. Really make sure you've got a roadmap. That would be so the three things I would say is that exec sponsorship, understanding the why you're doing, what the outcomes you're trying to achieve individually and organisationally, and then making sure you've got a roadmap that everyone can get behind.
Sounds good. Brendan, is there anything you want to add on success factors that you've seen?
Yeah, I think I'd probably add, it's going to sound a wee bit like I'm repeating what somebody's just said, but it's actually about the people for me. So it's having the right people on the project team, on the customer side, who have really got, taken ownership of the implementation. And if they can come with a nice kind of broad range of experience and previous disciplines and skill sets on that team, obviously enablement is key, which we've already covered. But to have that broad range of skills, the more comprehensive, the better, I think. Great to have some people that are, an idea person and people that are really knowledgeable at business and pragmatists and data experts, the whole gambit. Most crucially, the process owners, obviously, and those that are accountable for successful delivery. So, get the right skills across the right people, and then ensure their availability, and just make sure that they've got the bandwidth to apply to the project. So that team could be, 4 people or 14 people. It doesn't really matter as long as they bring that range of skills to the project.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, why don't we talk about implementation approach? So what's the best way to approach an implementation? What's work? What doesn't work? How do you prioritize what you're going to do, at the beginning and maybe in phase 1, and then what you're going to do afterwards? How do you keep the momentum going? What could slow things down during the implementation? So I might start with you, Brendan and Penny, and then I'll move on to Kylie and Jonathan. So, Brendan, do you want to start?
Sure.
What is the best approach?
Yeah, sure. So for new implementations, we would most commonly recommend what we call the shared success route. But basically that boils down to initially a workshop approach. So engage the project sponsors, the executive team, as you know, Kylene's mentioned in the past, IT managers, those key process owners, and that's so that your implementation partner can get a proper holistic view of the whole organization and where CRM needs to fit in and what it needs to deliver. And that can go down to some fairly detailed things, you know, those gems of what are the real pains that people suffer day to day with the current systems landscape that they've got, and what gains critically need to be achieved by CRM. And that process of that workshop process and that engagement informs a whole wodge of output, which is project scoping, planning, the creation of a map of your system landscape, and basically a unique kind of CRM roadmap. Penny touched on it earlier. That might be phasing, it might be basics, extend and expand. However that roadmap is implemented, that deals with not only the things that need to be addressed, but what priority they take, and also tackling head on how difficult they might be. And the top priority varies tremendously. It's different for every single organization. But typically it might be, where have we got too much manual processing? Where is there too much human error causing issues? Where is the duplication of effort, siloed data, lack of integration? And they might be dealt with in a phase one, for example. So that's the approach we would take. I think part of the question was about momentum.
Yep.
Penny's favorite topic. Momentum is absolutely critical and crucial. I actually personally think it's best maintained by frequent and regular project team calls. You know, I have customers saying, "Oh, do we really need to meet every week?" And the answer is yes, we do, because it's the only way we're going to stay on the same page, folks. You know, so let's just make sure we get that project team constantly engaged throughout the project. It doesn't have to be the same people every week. People will come and go into the project phases, but it gets us all on the same page. Everyone knows what everyone was supposed to do last week, how well it was done, what we're doing this coming week. That can go right down to daily scrums at certain critical points of the project. Ultimately, it's about trying to eliminate big surprises. Yeah, it's about trying to anticipate what's coming up on the horizon, what's happening next, who's needed for it. And then in terms of elements, I think you mentioned, Christel, what might slow a project down. I think certainly in my experience, the most common has been the involvement, or maybe the lack of involvement or lack of engagement of third parties. That will often occur with integrations, or where an organization is using a third party for maintaining their systems. Or maybe key IT resources who have got another project going. So again, knowledge about that, knowing when the resources are needed and getting them lined up so that we've got the right resource at the right time, and you know, build on from there.
Great. Penny, is there anything you want to add that you've seen in CRM implementation?
Done a great job of answering that question, but I suppose the thing that I would add is really that some companies, in my experience, will often focus an awful lot on the cost of using an implementation partner or the third-party contractors and try and squeeze that as much as possible. Now, obviously, budget management is really important because it's something you've really got to keep control of. But it's really important to balance that with the opportunity cost of delaying delivering or not delivering those outcomes of increased revenue, reduced operational costs, improved customer experience, and so on. Because the cost of not delivering those in a timely manner can be far, far, far higher than the cost of your implementation partner or bringing on a third-party contractor just to help you over the hump of the large amount of effort of the project and so on. So don't get too focused on the cost of the partner. Obviously, do your due diligence, but don't squeeze it too much, because actually you could risk those outcomes that you're looking to achieve. And the outcomes can be several factors, hundreds of factors greater than the cost of the implementation partner, in my experience.
Okay. Jonathan, when we talked earlier, you mentioned that you removed anything that could delay the project to ensure it went live on time. So can you tell us a little bit more about what was your implementation approach and how much momentum was there?
I guess we set a target and were trying to be as ruthless as possible within the realms of still being realistic about going live on that date. And so it was, you know, a nice day to have something happening in terms of a Valentine's Day type target. And we absolutely wanted it to, you know, be in and up and running by then. And we built the anticipation internally across the team. We built the expectation internally with the stakeholders that this was happening on that date. And, you know, please get on board because that's what's happening and you need to help us to get there. Integration, honestly, in our system, we were fortunate, I guess, because not everyone will be in the same boat, but we didn't need to integrate really with other systems because we didn't have a legacy CRM and we didn't bring much data into the CRM initially from other systems. So, but even from an integration point of view, the conversations that we were having were slightly brutal. You know, if you can help us with this integration, great. If not, then, you know, it won't be in the initial phase of the plan. And what was our plan B for getting around that? And we were very, very clear on we could go live, and we had a plan B for all of the things that required third-party people to be involved if they didn't help us to meet that date, which spurred some people on to make sure that they did assist us to help that to meet that date. But equally, a bit like Brendan said, you know, things come up in other departments and other stakeholders where it's just not possible for them to assist you with hitting that timeline. And we did have some of those situations, and it just meant that we went to plan B and we still, you know, it still went live. I think the final thing I would say is don't allow the scope to creep, because that's where, you know, you can then start going down a rabbit hole of building things that you perhaps really don't need in terms of just getting live. You can bring those things in later, but stay on plan for what it is that you're going to launch in that first phase.
So how long did it take you, Jonathan, to implement your first CRM at DX, from beginning of implementation to going live?
I think we had our, I should have looked this up. I think we had our success workshop at about the 2nd or 3rd week of December, because it was very close to Christmas, I remember. And we were live on Valentine's Day. So allowing for the fact that you had Christmas and everything in the middle of that, that was, you know, quite a fast turnaround.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So about 6 to 8 weeks, I guess, with the holidays. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
What about you, Kylene? What was your implementation approach?
Little things can make the difference. So we did keep an eye on those. And we involved our IT department from very early on to make sure that they were aware that they had a very large part in this, because we did have integration and we were going to need their input, their assistance. They would not be able to take a back seat on this at all. So I think there were a lot of conversations between our IT department and Penny, actually, because of that implementation. And we're a little bit more than a year out from when we went live, and even now we're still, you know, there's tweaks and changes and little things that you do that just make it easier for everybody. But there's also, you got to be prepared for late nights during implementation, a lot of late nights, a lot of hours where you feel like you're locked in the room with the rest of your team. And make sure you have food and water, you know, be prepared. But also be prepared for the unexpected. Unfortunately, in the middle of our planning phase, Penny got a phone call that I was going to have surgery and I was going to be out. And
that's a big unexpected.
Yes, it was very unexpected. And so Rotary, we had somebody that could step in, helped out, and then she was able to stay on whenever I came back. And we've kept her as part of our admin team now because she's more familiar with the project. So definitely have fallback people in mind beforehand, because that was not something that any of us expected to happen for sure.
Yeah. And that was really obvious with the Rotary team. They're very much a solution can do kind of approach. Is like, okay, Carling's out for 2 weeks at least, but it'll all be fine.
We'll do it. We'll get there.
Yeah,
and we had the holidays in the middle of ours too, because we're based in Georgia in the United States, so we had Thanksgiving and Christmas, and that was, you know, quite a big gap in there. So
may I ask, Eileen, how long did the project, how long did it take for you to go live?
we did, let's see, we had our first conversations with the group and then our success workshop in October, I believe.
October, yeah.
And then we went live in March.
Beginning of March, yeah.
Yeah.
They're the only customer I've ever met who had booked the training before they'd selected the tool or the partner.
Right.
So they'd already booked the hotel for the training because they had one date where they could do this.
Yes.
So, yeah.
We had a
so
specific time,
ahead, right?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. Because we had team members that had to come in from all over the United States, and we split it into 3 groups. And so we had to have that booked ahead of time to make sure that it was available.
So I guess from what I'm hearing from, you know, all of you is, you know, really planning ahead exactly what you're going to do, and don't deviate from that plan too much in the first phase of the launch of a CRM to kind of make sure that you drive the project to going live, right?
Right. And
getting the right people on board.
Right, and make sure you have your launch date, which we deviated a little bit with ours, but we had that grace period. But in our case, we were coming up on the end of a contract we were not going to renew, and so we wanted to make sure that we were well into Workbooks months before that happened, so that if we needed to get anything else out of it, that we could before we no longer had access to the previous CRM.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point, isn't it? If you're not implementing your first CRM and you've got a tool, then you might want to have both of them running in parallel just to make sure that you can still do all the things. Yeah, and track that all the information is right. Great. Well, why don't we talk about user adoption now? Because we know it's a really important. I mean, that was the highest rated pain point or worry for the audience on the call. So, Eileen and Jonathan, do you want to share a little bit about your experience on how did you enable your users? Maybe give us some, examples of, how do you get them involved? What sort of training did you do to enable them? How long did it last? Just give us a little bit of insight of how you got those users on board. And Eileen, do you want to start?
Sure. So we split, we have different departments within Rotary, and the largest one that uses the CRM is our sales team. And so we split them into 3 different groups. So we only had about 10 or so people per group. And we brought them in. We had very detailed how-to guides on how to do stuff, so that they had that handy and they could make notes. And that was very important for that part of it. But we also had people that we had involved in early in the project that really knew the system more, and we seated them, we mixed them in with the new people so that they were on hand to help anybody when we were going through steps, when we were showing them how to do things. And I think the smaller groups definitely helped with that part. And with the other teams, we implemented them like a week after that. We did all of the sales team within 3 weeks, and then the week after that, we trained the users at the corporate office. And so our sales team was in it a little bit longer, and I think that helped them be more familiar with it because they were using it out in the field. They wouldn't be with a support team really at the office to be able to help them. And we also showed them some of the cool stuff that Workbooks could do. So that helped get them on board a little easier because they were like, hey, you couldn't do this before, but look what we can do now. And that helped a lot, I think. But I think, and now when we do our training, we're able to train within a 3-day period with everything that a new sales person would need to know. whereas before it was taking probably about 5 days. And when we did our training for workbooks for existing sales team, we took about 5 days to do that. And it was a very long 5 days, but we got through it.
Great. What about you, Jonathan? What did you do to get the users on board and get them to adopt the tool? Because especially if you didn't have one before.
Yeah, so it was basically like doing a sales pitch internally to our colleagues on what was coming. But very similar to what Kylene's saying, so breaking the team down into smaller groups across the different areas. A lot of our team members have quite unique roles within the organization. So while they all might work in the service team, for example, you know, there are people who are specialized in different sectors like health, government, and so on. So again, similar to what Kylene's saying, you know, showing them how it can work for them and what we can do now that we weren't able to do before, you know, kind of at the touch of a button rather than running 3 extracts, a heap of VLOOKUPs and lots of time in Excel to get to the same answer on data that was then out of date because it probably took 3 days to get that information. So it, you know, it was really pulling that into the kind of more modern way of approaching everything. One of the key things for us was the mapping tool. You know, I don't know what year our previous mapping system was, if you want to call it a mapping system, because it was just a data view, but it was wholly inaccurate and it really wasn't a very user-friendly experience. But with the mapping tool in Workbooks, we were able to show them, you know, this is how you can see the members who are in a location that you're going to visit, prospects who are in that area, where the DX locations are. You know, it just visually brought everything together so much faster than anything that they had before. And a lot of our systems, you know, were quite antiquated, so they were kind of blue screen type applications. So having something that, you know, visually looked nice and modern really helped, and pulling some fun into it as well. So using the what are they called, like the notification feature, where you know, you can have a notification coming up, and we continue to use that. Even, you know, we're not an enormous team, so for things like birthdays, work anniversaries, special occasions, and celebrating success within the team, using those notifications to pop up across the organization has been a key one as well.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Penny and Brendan, any best practices that you can share on user adoption? I mean, it is one of the biggest topic, right, when you launch a new tool. So, Penny, any best practice you can share with the audience?
And just really to sort of reiterate based on the poll, you know, that every workshop I think I've ever done, when I've asked executives or reps or anybody involved in the CRM, what's the thing that is worrying you most? Adoption comes up every time, every customer. Adoption is always one of the biggest issues that people are worried about. So the poll wasn't really that surprising. Similarly, the data is the other one that everyone's worried about. The CRM itself is the easy bit. So, you know, from a user adoption point of view, I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's really about focusing on what you might call the WIFM, the what's in it for me, but for each role. So thinking about for the sales team or the customer services team or the finance team, and picking up really on what Jonathan was just saying about things like mapping, for example, being able to send a report daily to your field sales team of prospects that are nearby to meetings they've already got scheduled. So they can, so for example, if you sent it for the next 10 to 14 days, saying these are all the other prospects you could try and fit into your schedule for those days, which means they can either fit in more visits per day, or they could improve the velocity of the deals because they can really focus on the ones they need to see next, so they can try and get deals closed faster. And then thinking about your senior execs, providing a simple dashboard account view so that they can see at a glance what's going on with an account, particularly if they've been asked to go into a meeting or they've been asked to put a call into an account or something. You don't want them digging into every single activity or deal or case. You just want to show them what's the key status of this account. And I think one of the most common mistakes that companies make in implementing CRM is they try and get the system to, they try and automate too much, particularly, you know, for example, the situation with Rotary. The way that it had been implemented is it was generating hundreds of tasks a day for people to do things. And actually you want the system to do the work. So you want the system, you know, really rather than generating lots and lots of activities that people then have to go and open, see what they have to do the work, and then they have to complete the task and tell somebody they've completed it. Actually, if you have a dashboard or views that show you what needs to get done, and then once they're done, they automatically disappear off the report or the view, it just means that you're not creating all of these tasks, for example. You know, and as I said, it's really about, you know, showing the sales team, you know, where the best fit prospects are, or the ones that are most likely to close. And similarly, the customer service team showing the most important case for them to work on next, and what's going to have the biggest impact. So it's all really about focusing on how do you make that user's day job easier, where the CRM is in the path of the day job, not an admin burden at the end of the day.
Yeah, that sounds like good advice. Brendan, anything else in terms of best practice that you would want to share?
Yeah, I think probably back to people again. I don't think people are led by systems. I think people are led by influential colleagues and colleagues that show best practice. So make sure you've got CRM champions from the start. You know, like Jonathan and Kylene and Sarah at Rotary, for example. You know, their enthusiasm and their skills will be utterly invaluable through every phase of the project, especially really key areas like user acceptance testing, making the training available, preparation of training, and the actual training itself. And if anything, tackle head on those colleagues that are most resistant to change, or those doubters, and do that early on in the project. And try and get them engaged, get them involved, and get the champions leading them forward, and then bringing everybody else behind them. So all the way through UAT, end user training, and also give them a sense of, you know, shared ownership of the system, rather than this is something that's being forced upon them. So again, back to being people, all about people.
All about people. Okay. Right, well, let's go to the second hottest topic, because the time is running very quickly. We're already, you know, 45 minutes in. Conversation is so interesting that I don't want to stop it, but that we obviously have a hard stop in 15 minutes. So, other hot topic is data migration, potential integration with other business tools, data itself. That what am I going to put into that CRM? So, any advice on that particular area? So I'm going to start with you, Jonathan, because you said earlier that you were really ruthless with the data that got into the tool in the first place. So can you tell us a little bit more what the process you went through?
Sure. So our financial system had a lot of contact data in it, and we were extracting data from that sometimes when we wanted to use it for communication purposes. When we launched the CRM, we knew that you know, it wasn't a transition, so we didn't have that pressure like Kylene would have had. We weren't going to lose the financial system, so it was still going to be there. But I didn't want to pull data that I wasn't confident about into the system. So we were ruthless about what was coming in during that setup phase. We only brought contact data in, people data in, that we knew was live, as in it was something that was captured by the direct team kind of in the 6 to 12 months prior to the CRM going live. Anything older than that, we disregard it. And we just made sure that we started with as close to a kind of clean slate as possible. And then we've been able to enrich that as time has gone on. And it was the right thing for us to do, because we weren't in that position where we were trying to migrate everything from one system into another, and pulling you know, data in that you're not confident about the quality of it into a new system is just like muddying the textbook before you even, you know, give yourself a chance to get started with it. And it made, you know, from day one, it made it things like our reports much easier and much more realistic in terms of, you know, looking at whether it be an undeliverable report and trying to interrogate that. It was in double digits rather than something that was in the hundreds or thousands. So it just meant that we were dealing with things that were very, very contemporary. You're able to go back to a user and say, last month you created these people and their emails have bounced. Can you please go back and review it? So those types of that ruthless approach, I guess, to making sure that you only bring the cleanest possible data in at the start and the outset was really quite key for us. And I guess for also not feeling the pressure to put everything in the first launch. You might need it depending on what it is, but just not feeling the pressure to absolutely pull everything in, and maybe what am I going to have for launch and what am I going to migrate in maybe a stage or so later.
Sounds good. Kylie, in very different situation for you, right? Because you were migrating from a previous CRM. So just tell us a little bit of what did you do around the data aspect?
We went through it, a couple of us beforehand, and said, yes, we need this, we don't need that. That was the first step. And then we had to go through what we did need to bring in and start filtering out the fluff that was included in that, but we didn't need parts of it in there. So because we brought stuff over from the previous CRM, but then we are also importing all of our stuff from the system that we use behind the scenes. And unfortunately that creates duplicate issues. And so we had to go through that, and we're still working on that to a much smaller scale than what we started out on. But a recommendation that I would have for that is that if you're looking at something in your current CRM now and you're like, wow, I really need to clean this up, don't put it off. Do it. Go ahead and get it done, because otherwise it'll pile up later.
Okay. Brendan, any advice? Because data is always the word I'm always hearing from customers, that was the pain point, right? It's what data, is it clean or not? What do I need to do with it? And is the structure of the data that I've got going to work in my new tool? So give us some insights into what's best practice there.
Well, I think the general advice would be tackle that thorny issue as early as possible. So tackle legacy data early on. Get testing as early as you can to get even the basics of your data mapping done, and get testing and prototyping if necessary. Small parts of the solution to just break down the obvious barriers of connecting to systems and making sure those connections stay up and the performance is adequate. All of those good things. Data quality generally is almost guaranteed to be lower than you thought it was. And that's just a fact of life, unfortunately. Everybody thinks the data is just a little bit better than it is. And the complexity of integration is often higher than you hoped it might be as you dig deeper and deeper into what integration it is you need. So get those big potential issues exposed nice and early on in the project, so that your cleansing, your data preparation, transformations, and everything that's involved in the mappings and integrations, all of these can be planned to finish well in advance of when they're actually needed, which is well in advance of go live. It's really in advance of your UAT. I may have mentioned UAT once before. So make sure that part of your planning for UAT is the repetitive testing of new and existing integrations and the repeated checking of migrated data. That would be my takeaway.
Brendan, I don't want to presume, but can you specify what UAT stand for?
User acceptance testing. Did I say that before?
Okay. Let's make sure that everybody understands what those three-letter acronyms mean, that we're all on the same wavelength. Penny, is there anything else you want to talk about from a data perspective?
Yeah, I mean, much like Brendan, data is always my biggest worry in projects. I can think of one project I've done in 30 years where there was no data to take on to start with. Every other project has needed some kind of data migration. So it's really about going back to those initial outcomes, those desired outcomes to do with revenue and costs and so on. And then ask yourself how that data in your legacy system is going to help you achieve those outcomes. And if the data really doesn't add any business value, then really challenge the business team on why they really want it. It could just be that it's their comfort blanket. And and therefore, you know, it doesn't really fit into the new way of working. And also review when you realistically need that data, because you might not need it all for go live. And you could just bring across the most recent data for go live and then migrate any historic data later. And of course, the advantage of that approach is that you might be able to bring the go live date forward, which means that you can get those outcomes that you're looking to achieve starting to deliver much earlier. And then similarly, sort of with integrations, understand the business value in the integration before deciding on which integration approach to take. Because not all integrations need to be those potentially costly real-time connections. Simpler hourly or nightly updates might be all that you need for some of the business processes that you have. So as I say, always focus on what's the outcome that you're trying to achieve and what's the business value of that process or that data or that integration before you start sort of getting all the tools out of the kit bag. I mean, you've heard me talk about this before, you know, if you think about moving house, and I've just done that last week, you don't take everything with you. I did get rid of some stuff before I moved, so just think about, if you're moving house, what do you really need to take with you, and approach your data the same way.
Great advice. Great
advice.
Right, so we're about to finish. So I've got one last question before we open it to the audience. So if you want to ask a question to our panel, if you wouldn't mind just asking your question in the question panel of GoToWebinar panel, control panel. And so last question I'm going to ask Kylene and Jonathan only is, if you could start all over again, what would you do differently? Kylene.
That would probably be to weed through all of the potential CRMs to get down to at least, I'd say 2 to 3 as quickly as possible. That process probably took me the longest. I started with probably 15 to 18, and then we narrowed it down to 2 that actually came to the company and gave us the pitch to everybody, and when we made our decision, and that was the longest process.
Okay. And what about you, Jonathan? If you were restarting the entire process, what would you do differently, if anything? I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite comfortable with the process that we've gone through. I guess ideally we would have done it years ago. Which was through no lack of trying, obviously, but it was good that we finally got there. I guess trying to get some extra functionality built in at the very outset. It's always more difficult to get budget later, like once the CRM's gone live. But you know, as a business person, manager within the business, you're trying to strike that balance between, you know, getting the budget signed off so you can get the CRM without necessarily outpricing yourself at the same time. But maybe we could have pushed harder to get some extra customization built in from the start, from the outset. But okay. You know, all in all, it really certainly hasn't slowed us down, and I just can't believe how lucky we were to implement it when we did, given that the team were remote working a month later.
Yeah, sometimes things just happen for a reason, right?
For a reason,
just perfect timing. Right, we have some questions coming in. We only have 5 minutes, so let me go through those questions. So first question from Ashley: given the shared use across the wider business, do you need one owner of the CRM, or should you have multiple ones?
That's a really good question. A really good question. My advice would be you need one ultimate owner, and I can think of a project that I was involved in many years ago where the CMO and the EVP of sales could not agree on what a qualified lead looked like. And in the end, the CEO had to step in and bang some heads together. And I'm going back quite a few years ago now, but you need ultimately one owner who's going to be responsible for making sure that everything's still going on track and stepping in when necessary.
Okay. Second question, when do you know you are ready to go live?
Did I mention user acceptance testing?
I think you didn't.
Just in case I didn't. It's something that I must admit is a pet topic, but when I'm launching a project, I start talking about planning for user acceptance testing right at the very beginning. I even mention it, and you know, Penny and I do in the shared success workshop before you've even committed to Workbooks. But it's the single most important phase of the project, because that is the point when you know you're ready to go live. When you've passed all those tests, you've got green ticks down the entire sheet, and you can confidently say to your user base you're going live. So planning for that point and making sure everything in there that needs to be in there is checked off, basically.
Okay. Another question from David. How many days would you envisage a project manager to spend per week on a 6 months integration?
Every day.
Pretty, yeah.
Every day.
I was waiting for someone to say 5.
Every day.
There you go. And then the last one, we have a lot of automated workflows. How hard is it going to be for us to integrate those workflows in the new CRM, and how do we approach that? That's a very broad question as well.
Yeah, I think I'd go back to what I said earlier about not necessarily. It's some systems are sometimes the technology is driving that way of working. And actually it should be the business process that's driving the technology rather than the other way around. So, okay. You know, I mentioned, you know, when we first met at Rotary, they had a staggering number of tasks to migrate. Oh, yeah. And they were being created automatically by the system because that's what the workflow did. But actually they didn't need, you know, they needed only a fraction of the of that kind of activity creation that they're doing. So I would really challenge and go back to what's the business process, what's the business value? Are you just generating, are you automating because you've got a cool tool and actually you're just creating more work for people? So business process before technology.
Okay, great. Well, I think we've run out of time. So thank you very much to all our panelists and to all of you for taking the time to join us. We hope to see you again on one of our forthcoming webinars. You'll get the recording tomorrow via email, and there's a few more questions that have come in, so we'll try and answer those via email if we can. Have a lovely end of the day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.